Hello and welcome to this new video. In the previous video, we integrated and implemented a user inventory management system. I showed you how to add and consume items in the user inventory. As you saw, the addition is currently done for all items, regardless of their type, purchasable or not. In a real game, you shouldn't add purchasable items to the user inventory unless they complete a full purchasing process. That will be the topic of this video. We will now see how to integrate and implement an in-app purchasing system for the purchasable items in our game inventory. Before we begin, I want to inform you that I've changed the definition of my items. What I did is I added 3 custom properties. Is_purchasable is true if the item has a price. This helps me identify the items that need to be purchased before being added. Price_USD_hundreds is the price of the item in USD, expressed in hundreds. When purchasing an item, the price must be given in hundreds and in a currency supported by Steam. VLV is not supported during a purchase, so what I do is convert the VLV price to USD for each purchasable item. Is_recurring is true if the purchase should be recurring. We use this property to identify recurring transactions. In this video, we'll see how to use these properties to implement our in-app purchasing system. The first thing to do is to enable the Add button only for purchasable items. We need to read the is_purchasable property from the item definition. Select the button and then create an activation binding. From the item definition, retrieve the value of the property. It's the same process we followed for the is_consumable property. I'm removing the implementation of the Add button because we need to initialize a transaction first. In Easy OSS, under Commerce Steam Transactions, you will find all the tasks you can use to integrate in-app purchases into your game. You can find the full documentation for Steam microtransactions in the Steamworks Web API documentation. Make sure that the store is enabled on the item store page of your application. The Get Steam Player Purchase Info task is used to indicate whether a specific player is allowed to make purchases or not. We need to use it to check if the local player can make purchases before starting the transaction. The IP address is optional, it is only required if the purchase is made from the web. This is not the case for us, as we are using in-app purchasing. It's worth noting that all tasks in this web API require the specification of the Steam purchase interface to be used. Steam offers two interfaces for microtransactions. The microtransaction interface should be used in a live environment, meaning the player will be charged. For our development case, we won't be making real transactions. For this, Steam provides the second interface, which is the microtransaction sandbox. This interface is to be used during testing. What we will do is obtain it from the game instance to use it from any object. So, simply change it in the game instance when you move to production. In the interface of your game instance, add the function that returns the interface. Implement the function by returning the sandbox interface. Get this interface in the construct event of the widget. We can now connect it to all tasks that require it. The return structure provides information about the player, such as their state, which is empty for non-US citizens, country, currency, and account status. What we are interested in is the account status. We need to check that this status is not blocked. Display an error message if the call fails. Call the init Steam player transaction task. This task is used to initialize a transaction for the specified player, and it returns a structure containing information about the initialized transaction. The order is a structure containing all the information related to the items to be purchased, including the total price of the order, and whether the purchase is recurring or not. In this video, I am making purchases for a single item at a time, but you can, of course, create an order with more than one item. Your secure server must generate a unique ID for each order. To keep things simple, I generate a random integer. Be careful, you cannot initialize more than one order with the same order ID, otherwise the task will fail. The item count and the item array must have the same size. In our case, the size will be 1. In this example, I am purchasing items only, so I am not using bundles. The language must be an ISO 639-1 language code, for example, N4 English. Check the documentation to see the list of languages supported by Steam. Same for the currency. The use session can be either client or web. In our case, it's from the app, so we can leave it empty because Steam considers it as client in this case. The IP address is not required since we are making a purchase from the game. The items array is a list of the items to be purchased. The item ID can be the item definition ID. The quantity is the number of items to be purchased. The amount is the total price of these quantities in hundredths. A description of the item must be provided. The category and the associated bundle are optional. The last 4 parameters should only be used if the purchase is recurring. The billing type can be either Steam or game. Steam will automatically rebill, while for game, the partner needs to call the process agreement. We are not using it in this example. The process Steam player agreement task should only be used if the billing type is game. The period is the period for recurring billing. The possible values are day, week, month, and year. The frequency is the number of times per period. The supported value is between 1 and 255. The recurring amount is the price to be charged for each rebill. Generally, it's the same amount as the order. To determine if it's a normal transaction or a recurring transaction, we need to retrieve the value of the custom property, is_occurring. What I want to do is create a function that returns the order of the transaction. In this function, we determine whether the transaction is recurring or not. The function should return an order structure. I generate a random order ID. The item count is 1. I want to display the price in USD dollars. You can find the formats in the documentation. Use the item definition to provide the item ID and the quantity. I get the amount from the item definition by reading the amount_USD property. Add a function that is used to find the amount of an item. Call the function and then connect the output. To determine if it's a recurring transaction or not, I need to read the value of the is_occurring property. Add a function that is used to return the value of this property. Connect this function to the select node. Duplicate the item implementation to initialize a recurring purchase. I use the Steam billing type with a capital S. I will initialize a monthly subscription, so I set the value month for the period and 1 for the frequency. I use the same amount as the order. Call the function by connecting the order. The initialized transaction is a structure containing the order ID, transaction ID, and the Steam URL. This URL is returned only for web purchases, so it won't be the case for us. Promote the output to a variable. Display an error message if the call fails. Once the transaction is initialized, we need to wait for the user to complete or cancel it. Therefore, we must initialize a timer to check the transaction status on the user's side. Add a custom event that is used to check the transaction status. Promote the timer to a variable so that it can be invalidated later. Using the transaction ID, we need to check its status by calling the query Steam transaction task. This task is used to return all the information about a transaction. The return structure contains all the information about the transaction. What interests us is the transaction status, which is an enum indicating the current status of the transaction. Init means that the transaction has been initialized. It will be approved when the player finalizes the purchase. It will be succeeded when we call the finalize process after the player's approval. The other statuses will be returned when a refund is requested for the transaction. Make a switch on the transaction status. If the status is failed, it means that the user has cancelled the transaction. In this case, we need to invalidate the timer. If the status is approved, it means the player has finalized the purchase. We need to finalize the transaction so that the player will be charged and the transaction will change to the succeeded state. Call the Finalize Steam Transaction task to finalize the transaction. Display an error message if the call fails, then invalidate the timer. If the finalize is done, we need to add the purchased items to the user inventory. We will use the Add Item to User Inventory task. You need to use the quantity to add the item n times. If the call is successful, display a message on the screen and then invalidate the timer. It's important to note that if the call fails, the item is not added, but the user is charged. In this case, you must either retry adding the item or refund the player. I want to call the refund task to refund the player. In a real game, you must implement a system that checks all transactions and verifies the items in the user's inventories, so an automated system that either refunds or re-adds the items. Launch the game to test. As you can see, the purchasable items have the Add button enabled. For an item with a quantity greater than 1, the addition must be done n times. The user has 5 snipers. I will try to purchase one more sniper. There you go, the social overlay is open and the timer is initialized. We can clearly see the item and its quantity, as well as the description. We can also see the total in dollars as we defined. If we click on Authorize, the transaction will be approved, and then the timer can continue execution to finalize it. Try canceling the transaction. The timer is stopped, and the item is not added. Repeat the process by authorizing the transaction. There you go, the transaction is approved and finalized, and the item has been added. Try purchasing an item that has a subscription. Here, Steam informs the user that it's a recurring payment every month, with the amount charged now and the amount that will be charged each month. Click on Authorize. The transaction is finalized, and the item has been added. It's important to note that your game must add this item on each rebill. And there you go, everything is working fine. In the next video, we'll see how to manage transactions and subscriptions. That's all for this video, see you in the next one.